Henry had Anne arrested and held in the greatly expanded Tower of London. By now, the tower complex had grown to a sprawling 18 acres with an impenetrable facade. The wooden barricade had been replaced and expanded by thick stone walls. A series of towers reinforced their strength and stability. Just inside the outer wall, a second wall was constructed to provide another layer of fortification. A ditch had been dug around the perimeter and filled with water to form a moat. With these added defenses, the tower complex was virtually undefeatable. Under Henry's ruthless reign, the fortress became the location for an orgy of violence, a notorious prison, dungeon, and execution ground for his many enemies. And it was here that Anne awaited her fate, death by beheading.
Axe executions were actually really nasty because it was not uncommon for the axe not to finish the job in one blow. What he does with Anne Boleyn, he says, "For you, darling, nothing but the best." Instead of having her beheaded with an axe, he's going to have her beheaded nice and neatly with a sword.
On May 19, 1536, Anne was led to a private courtyard on the tower's grounds. With one swift stroke, Henry's problem was solved. But Henry's longing for a son was only part of a more ambitious quest. Since the beginning of his reign, he had lusted after a dream of ultimate glory, to transform England into an empire.
This idea of a realm that would cover every part of Europe and extend beyond was always in the back of Henry VIII's mind. His real vision and dream, his great appetite was for dominion and empire.
But Henry's road to empire put him on a collision course with France and Spain, Europe's reigning superpowers. His plan of attack? To fill the high seas with floating weapons of mass destruction. Summer 1510. An army of laborers scour England's forests, gathering material for a colossal undertaking on England's road to empire. Before King Henry VIII could conquer the land, he needed to conquer the sea. He set out to radically transform the way battles were fought and won by turning his ships into deadly weapons.
He is the one who first begins putting heavy guns on ships. To put these large siege warfare type guns, ship cracking guns, some of them weighing almost a ton, on shipboard that could be used to batter your enemy into submission.
Massive guns required massive ships. Henry ordered his naval engineers to build a new and imposing fleet. The centerpiece, his flagship, was one of the world's first battleships. It was called the Mary Rose.
The Mary Rose really epitomizes the mentality of naval planners of that age. Get as many guns pointing as many directions on shipboard as you possibly can. And that's what the Mary Rose was set to become, a gun platform.
The Mary Rose featured a breakthrough advance in warship design, gun ports. Holes were carved into the side of the ship with flaps that could be lowered over them. These holes allowed cannons to be positioned and fired through the side. Naval designers could now engineer decks dedicated solely to firepower. The added weapons turned the Mary Rose into a killing machine.
This was a major revolution, really, in ship design, of which the Mary Rose was at the sort of very beginning.
By the mid-16th century, England's march toward naval dominance was in full flow. But Henry soon ran into a problem. The cost of arming his ships with expensive bronze guns was quickly draining England's treasure chest.
He's got to find other ways to produce the kinds of, heavy artillery which can help his armies and his navy fight effectively, but at a lower cost. And the cast iron gun's the perfect solution. The cast iron gun runs less than a fifth of the cost of a bronze one.
A successful cast iron cannon had never been made before, but Henry knew how to make it happen. He turned to the country's famous iron-making region, the Weald, and gave his engineers a mandate.
The difficulty with casting in iron a large piece like a cannon was the fact that, for a start, iron had to be melted at a much higher temperature.
There was only one way to get the temperatures high enough, an engineering wonder of the time, the blast furnace. First, workers poured wood and iron ore into the top of a 20-foot-tall stone furnace. A water wheel powered a large bellows that pumped air into the fire, stoking it until it reached an incredible 2,200 degrees, hot enough to melt the iron. Workers then opened a tap at the base of the furnace. A stream of hot molten iron poured down a trough and filled a cannon mold buried deep in the ground.
It was a very big undertaking, and it was very pressured as well. You had, of course, charcoal burners who produced the charcoal in the woods around the furnace. You had labourers who dug the iron ore from pits in the ground. You had teams of labourers bringing wagon loads of ore and charcoal to the furnace.
Over the next few centuries, the Weald's iron cannons became the envy and dread of every other European ruler.
The transformation is tremendous. It gave England power and a technological edge that no other European power could match.
In just 30 years, Henry had built his navy into a powerhouse, but he would never live to see his ultimate dream of European conquest. Enormously obese, his oversized appetites finally betrayed him. He died in January 1547, leaving a legacy of brutality and innovation that stands through the ages. His reign had laid the seeds that would explode into a mighty empire.
And Henry lays the foundations all right by building a navy, by building this notion of Britain as forming an empire, an imperial presence in the world.